Ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited today. I'm here. I must admit, just to start it off on the top, I've been a groupie of Barna for years, actually for decades. I'm a tech nerd. And so I'm super excited to present to the Fall Conclave the Senior Vice President of Barna, Sister Brooke Hempell. Brooke, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you, Rev Tony.
Well, it's wonderful to have you with us. Now, look, tell folks a little bit about Barna so they can just kind of get a sense of what you all do.
Yeah. So Barna has been around for 35 years. We have been doing research on people's faith practices and their beliefs, and then also how that intersects with culture. So we'll study cultural trends and we'll look to see how do people of faith and churchgoers live out that faith. We'll talk to pastors and ask them about things that are new on their horizon and how are they handling those, and what are some best practices. And then we monitor trends over time to see what's the spiritual health of our nation, what's the spiritual kind of trends in terms of different ways of discipling and growing those in the faith. So we really just track all of these metrics with a biblical lens. And I think that's the distinction between us and just any polling company is, all of our staff are committed Christians. And so we interpret what we see in a very different light than just as academics.
Now, how has that, well, so I know for myself, that's been extremely helpful. I remember being, my goodness, I'm talking about the mid 90s now when I was starting in ministry, and periodically kind of looking at you all stuff, and being able to kind of see what trends were coming down the line. How have churches and faith leaders, how has your data been helpful for them in looking at the trends and those things that are coming?
Yeah, a lot of ways. So one of the most common things that people are watching is what's happening with young people or young adults.
Hmm.
And so, they grow up in our households and then they go out into the world. And then very often, as we've seen over time, they leave the church. And so we've seen an increasing trend of that in the US over the last 3 decades. And so churches, of course, are thinking, so what do we do? How do we better equip them and help them to have a strong faith when they're young? And then how do we help engage them when they are out on their own, they're young adults, and they're kind of making their own choices? So a lot of what we look at would be things like how do you outreach to youth and young adults, and also how do you help train up a child so that you're preparing them for a lifelong faith. So that's one area. Another area that's really common is what we will call loosely outreach or evangelism. Just how do we share faith, and how do we equip other believers to share faith? How do we equip the saints to be Jesus in the world in sharing their faith? And then, what does that look like in terms of connecting with our community and our neighborhoods? What does that look like in terms of connecting with those around the world? So tracking trends in both taking care of those in the church and then reaching the world outside of our church.
Now, in all of that, so our theme for this fall conclave, and shout out to Presiding Elder Braxton. I'm AME, so you always got to shout out the leadership. So shout out Presiding Elder Braxton for the amazing work he's doing. But the theme for this year was spiritually and technologically navigating the shift. And if 2020 has been anything, it's been a shift.
For sure.
I mean, it is, in a variety of ways. I almost felt like I've never been a surfer, but I felt this must be what surfing is about. That it's one wave after the other after the other, and you're just trying to figure out how to steady yourself.
With a shark behind you, yeah.
With the shark, exactly, exactly. And then all of a sudden, some kind of dinosaur in the water from Jurassic Park coming, behind the shark. It's just like it's been that kind of a year. It's just really been that kind of a year. But talk to us a little bit about Barna and how Barna has been impacted by the shifts of this 2020, but then also what that caused you all to do and how that has allowed you all to kind of be helpful for churches.
Yeah. So it's interesting that term even is one that we've been watching. So we were already seeing a shift to what we call worship shifting or worship replacement, where there was actually a shift of young people who were kind of drawing away from the church. They were kind of curating their own experiences, right? They were maybe watching podcasts or watching their favorite preachers on YouTube. Or they were engaging with people through social media, but they maybe weren't as connected to their local church. So that was particularly common in young adults. So that was already a shift taking place, and then came COVID.
Wow.
And so churches, of course, shut down. And many of them who didn't have a digital presence were suddenly forced to come up with how do we engage people digitally. And in a lot of ways, I think it was good. It was an incredibly painful change because it happened so fast and without a lot of resources to address. You're facing, a community that's in need and hurting while also needing to be there. So that was of course really hard for so many churches, but I think a lot of what it will produce will be good. Because many churches were already feeling this pull in that direction, but they just couldn't get the inertia to say, all right, let's make this shift, right? So this forced us into innovation, and those that have embraced it have done it really well. So that's been interesting, and I'll talk about some of those best practices in a minute. But what we started doing is very quickly, we started surveying pastors every week. We were asking them, how are you doing? How is your church doing? What are you experiencing financially? How are you responding in terms of connecting with your congregation and your broader community? And what do you think is going to happen, in the next few months? And so that just allowed us to track ongoing how the church was doing. So, we've got over half a year's now of this ongoing tracking data, and have been able to track how churches have adapted, and they really have. There were some in the early days who were really hit hard financially. And so the example would be, let's say it's a smaller church who doesn't have online giving set up, and you rely on that weekly check, right? And suddenly you're not getting that, and your people aren't set up to be able to bring that to you. So there was a huge lag there, and some churches really struggled, and some have even closed as a result, which was just a heartbreaking thing that occurred to the church. There were others who were definitely at risk, and there was a great campaign that started maybe April or March or May, where churches were. It was this campaign called Churches Helping Churches. Churches were donating if they were okay, if they were financially stable. They were donating to then give to those churches that were more struggling, and maybe they also were serving members who were much more in need. Maybe there were more people who were sick or who were essential workers, and they just really needed that help. So that was a beautiful reaction, I think, in the church, in the broader, whole church body. The churches started collaborating a bit more, and it helped some churches significantly. And for other churches, it gave them a sense of being able to do something meaningful. So we've been tracking that. We've been also periodically surveying church goers as well as non-church goers and asking what they're doing. Are they praying more? Are they reading the Bible? Are they watching church online? What did they miss? What is the struggle that they're having? How are they feeling emotionally? How's their mental health? So those are some things we've been monitoring over time, and it's been really helpful to be able to share that information ongoing to help pastors kind of see the land and understand, okay, what might my congregation be experiencing? What might my community be experiencing? And how can I respond to that?
Quick question. What have you been seeing about how congregation members are feeling and what some of their needs are and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So initially, some of their needs were very practical. It was, if they had been hit by a layoff, or they just had reduced hours or couldn't work because they were ill, there was a lot of practical needs. I literally need food and rent money. Right. And then as time wore on, I think you have that initial adrenaline rush, right? So you kind of get through those first few months. As time wore on, the fatigue really set in. And so what we saw was people saying, I really need spiritual help. I need someone to pray with me. I need someone to come alongside me and just talk to me, like literally counseling. They just need to talk to someone. And interestingly, that need was higher amongst the younger population. So we thought our seniors who might be living alone, maybe they're feeling really isolated, maybe they're not as digitally connected, and so maybe they're in the most need. And in fact, that wasn't what we saw in the data. Wow. We saw that they connected with a few people in their community, and they felt sufficiently, supported by that network. But the young adults were really experiencing a great deal of anxiety because they were actually more at risk of layoffs. So they're often, those jobs are the first to go. So they were nervous about it, even if they hadn't experienced it. And then they also didn't have as deep of those relationships to hold them up, right? So they needed to be able to rely upon people, and maybe those relationships weren't as deep enough that they felt like they could call people or be honest with people about how they were feeling. So that was kind of a surprise that there was just this emotional anxiety that people were experiencing and still are, where they really need their church to come alongside them and support them through that.
Yeah, I use one of you all's tools. I actually, because I have Barna Access Plus, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. I shaped a poll, or a poll to our congregation, short one, just 10 questions. And what got me and what was significant for me was that when we asked them about their needs, their primary needs, largest needs, that because we've been feeding people, and we've actually starting a big financial kind of program and free financial training through on Dave Ramsey, and we bought a site license to
Great.
him.
Yeah.
But what I saw was, so the food need was big, the financial need was big, but emotional support was a third bigger than both.
Wow.
And I think that was just very, like you felt it, but it was just stunning to see right there on paper. That the folks, like the food stuff was about 15%. The financial support was about 20%, but the emotional support was at 35%.
Yeah, it's
And
huge.
that was really significant, that when you saw how many people are feeling anxious during this time period, because that was some of the
Yeah.
questions that we had, not just financial anxiety, but just anxious. I
Yeah.
was able to look at that. And I think that one of the things for me is those tools you all have, especially around kind of getting data on your congregation, allowed us to even see other ways to shape ministry and to focus ministry. We've been doing stuff. We've been doing mental health stuff throughout the whole pandemic. We've been doing a lot of that stuff, but it just showed us what we need to lean on and into it even a little bit more. And I think that's one of the great things about kind of the data that you all show, that I appreciate how you all shape the new tools, because previously I was just looking at the data from the people you all were polling, but
Right.
now I can poll my own congregation and look at the
Yeah.
data for myself. And for me, that was extremely, extremely helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's a really powerful, and I didn't mention that part of the tool that basically a lot of those surveys that we do, we then offer these tools for people to do in their church, for leaders to be able to say, let me connect with my people and see how they're doing. And I think that's really powerful, because not only does it give you a lay of the land, like how are my people and how can I best serve them? Your time is limited, you need to put your energy where it's the most effective. But also it sends a message that you care, like you really
Right,
want to hear how they're doing, and you don't
right,
have time to call everyone every week,
right,
but
right,
this is a
right.
way to say, no, we're listening. We want to hear what you need. We want to be there for you. So tell us what is what's on the top of your mind, what's most important to you right now. So I love that you're using that and kind of acting upon that data in a way that's very strategic to help serve your congregation well.
Now, I know another challenge for pastors. What have you all been seeing around online worship? What trends have you been seeing? Are people watching as much as they were? Just kind of, I mean, help us, please, Jesus.
Yeah, I know, right? I know. I will say that's the one thing that people miss the most. They
Mm,
miss in-person worship. I mean, all these online concerts are great, and online worship is great because it's bridging a gap, but man, did they miss it. So
mm.
8 out of 10 churchgoers say, the moment we can get back to in-person worship, I want to be there.
Wow.
They are just like, that is the most important thing. But good question about engaging. So, again, there was a scramble in the beginning of let's figure out how to get ourselves online to stream our message or to connect in whatever way, people were able to make that work. And the way that they addressed that actually determined a little of how people engaged.
Mm,
So we saw people initially want to engage online with their church's regular service, whatever that was. And they did that over time, and then it faded. And
mm.
we saw people start to drop off, such that now we have about a third of those regular churchgoers who are like, I've kind of stopped watching. And when
Wow.
we ask people what's
Hold on a
going
second. You
on,
said a
yeah,
third.
third, a third.
Good God Almighty. Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's like, they may still have a connection to the church, but like showing up on a Sunday and doing the
Right.
Sunday thing is
Mm-hmm.
just out of their rhythm. So there's two things going on there. One is that people have changed their rhythms because
Mm,
they've just like all the schedules are a mess, and so everyone's kind of
mm-hmm.
like, well, I'll watch it whenever. But the other is, um, those churches that really did digital well have engaged people and they've really retained them. But the churches that kind of decide, I'm just going to stream our regular service, people don't want to just be consumers. They want to be a part of it. They want to be able to have interaction. They have that, need for connection. And so if they're not getting that from their church, they're either completely stepping away or they're maybe connecting with another church community that's doing that digital experience better. So one of the things we've learned through this is that it's not sufficient to just say, I'm just going to take a camera and set it up in front of the pulpit and do the thing we always do. Whether there's people in the building or not, like just streaming that service doesn't have the same effect.
Wow.
So churches that have really engaged this differently, and they've said, we're going to actually rethink our worship service so that it feels engaging to someone who's sitting on their couch. That's been really productive. And then also we're going to create like a side-by-side kind of social aspect that allows people to connect while we're doing service. So for example, doing Facebook Live, and if you watch the little chat, function on the side, people are talking, they're praying for each other, they're like shouting out, you're getting that feedback, right? You feel like you're there and you're a part of it, as opposed to just consuming it, right? So you need that two-way interaction happening with the digital, or people are just like, look, I can just watch any sermon anytime. I can watch any worship song anytime. So what's the difference between that and my church's service if it's not unique?
Wow. Now, have you also seen, I heard on one of the things you all talked about time shifting, in which people are also starting to kind of shift the times in which, so folks may not watch it on Sunday, but it's important to have it available at other times so people can go and be able to watch it.
Yeah. So about a quarter of people were saying, I am still doing my church service, but I'm not doing it on Sunday morning. So while you do want ideally that interaction, which draws people in, you also want to make that available. If people have had a shift because someone's sick or someone's working or whatever, making that available at another time has actually helped people to stay engaged. And I think we've even seen some of people's preferences show up where some people are like, hey, I love doing Sunday service, but what if we do it in Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening? Like what if that rhythm, like, is that wrong? What if that rhythm changes? And so they're really, individuals are really rethinking like, hey, if I have the flexibility, what would I prefer to do? What's going to help me to just engage the most? So we're seeing that, but we're also seeing a little bit of people going, I was interested in, kind of watching my service or whatever, but when I know people are on there, I'm more likely to show up. Like when I know my friend's going to be on there watching with me, or have a little mini watch party, like a little small group, 5 people that get together. A friend comes over and we watch together, like that relational aspect is more likely to help people show up together at the same time.
Wow. So then if I hear you correctly, then it could be helpful if you have it in your on-demand area, or if you have it somewhere on your Facebook page, but someone can still do a watch party or facilitating ways that people can still have access to it, so that they don't just have to wait and just get it when you're doing the streaming on Sunday mornings at 8, 10, and 12, but that it might be Thursday, but they can say, hey, I'm about to watch church, join me.
Yes.
And they can share it with their friends. And in that way, I would think then it would be interesting that you could actually encourage your members to have their own watch parties at different times and invite their friends.
Yes. So really good point. Some of the young people who have been more engaged, and a lot of young people have dropped off, but who have been more engaged, they have been inviting non-Christian friends, non-church friends. And they felt more comfortable doing that with this sort of setup, right? Like, so bringing someone into your church, there's all these kind of norms and expectations.
Right.
And often they're worried that this person they want to invite is going to feel uncomfortable or, awkward. It's like, this is no biggie. Just jump online with me and let's watch this. Like, let's do it together. And it's low barrier, very comfortable, you don't have to commit to a lot. You don't have to get dressed. You can be in your pajamas if you're doing it from home. It's so easy. That people have been more willing to reach out and invite someone to church, which has been an encouraging development for sure.
That's pretty incredible. Now, I want to shift just a little bit because you all are doing you all have a new report about to come out, I believe next year, that you've been working on. And So I feel like, I also have a radio show on the gospel station, and as a radio personality, it's a big deal when you can break a new album, which you get to play it first. Right. It's
Yes.
kind of a big deal. It gives you kind of bragging
Yes.
rights. You know, I broke this first. It went to get a Grammy, but it played first
That's
on
right.
my show. Right.
That's right.
And so I'm trying to break, you all's new album, right? Before it comes
Love
out, you
it.
can drop the single right here, at the Fall Conclave, for Elder Braxton. But what is it called? The State of the Black Church report, or what's it being
Yeah.
called?
Well, we actually are still working on the exact name, but it'll probably be Trends in the Black Church.
Okay.
And then so it's state of loosely, because it's something that the last time we did it was about 20 years ago.
Wow.
So it's like that was the state of 20 years ago.
Right.
And then now we were already in the midst of doing the study in 2019, and then we hit 2020, and we're like, good night.
Wow.
Like, hold on, hit pause. We have a lot that we need to equip the church with here. Like,
right.
Let's figure out what's going on so that we can not just see what's been happening, but equip churches to go forward. Right.
Right.
So we've actually kind of delayed the launch a bit. It was supposed to come out this fall, right about now. And we were like, well, let's spend a little more time doing some more research with some churches and some congregants so we can get a better sense of what next.
Right.
So the idea with Trends is not just the state of, but like, where's it going? What's the future as well?
Right.
And how is the church adapting to this, right? Like this is a great opportunity, but also a great challenge.
Right.
So our hope is to give people a little bit more of a forward-looking, data set that will help them be prepared to engage well in ministry going forward. So we're super excited. Can I tell you a little bit about what's in there?
That's what I was getting ready to ask. I was going to say, all right, spill the beans, spill the beans.
So good. We are super excited about this study, and I have been wanting to do it for a number of years because we've been gathering these church leaders who were like, we need some data. We need, we want y'all to refresh that 20-year-old study. And we're like, yes, we want to. So we have, in this COVID moment, been able to study not only trends of like people's beliefs and practices, but we've been able to ask them about all sorts of civic issues. Oh my goodness, what a year to study civic issues and engagement, right?
Yes.
And we have watched the church rally. I mean, it has been amazing to watch the church come together, and across all denominations, across all the regions of the U.S., like the church is coming together to rally towards a desired future. And I think that was really powerful. I think people felt a lot more of an empowerment through that was kind of missing. And we were excited to ask young people, or people of all ages, but what is their expected role of the church when it comes to civic engagement and government and politics? And we thought, okay, of course, we expect a certain level of buy-in, but will our younger generation feel the same? Like, will the younger generation that maybe doesn't have as tight of a tie with the church, how are they going to feel about this? They expect the church to show up more, which is amazing. So even people who aren't regular churchgoers are like, yeah, I expect the church to be involved in civic issues.
Right.
So that's a really cool open door for the church. Like, let's reinvigorate this. Let's be more in the public arena, yes, in our communities, but not just our communities. Like, let's be a leader. So that was super exciting to see that data coming together. We also asked a lot of internal questions for those who are part of a Black church in one of these denominations, that what are their experiences and expectations when it comes to leadership and leadership development? What are their expectations around kind of programming? How are they growing in their faith and their strengthening of that faith, and what are they using to actually kind of feed their soul? So we're getting a lot of good insights about basically the things that churches would want to know for rethinking their programming. Like, if we're starting over, right? We're starting over because COVID's changed everything. What are the priorities? Let's put them in first, and let's stack up what people really want to have as part of our church programming.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, was there anything that just really surprised you, and especially from the Black church standpoint, whether it's historical, whether it's whether it's kind of the historical nature, or whether it's kind of patterns of where people are leaning and kind of move towards? Was there anything that kind of surprised you all, or that really jumped out off the page?
Yeah. So some of the things are like, it just gives you more clarity on what you kind of intuitively expect. And then it's just nice to see it and you go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But some of it was a little surprising. Here's one example. We see, if you look across the entire African American population in the U.S., so churched
Mm-hmm.
and not churched,
Mm-hmm.
in a Black church or in a multi-ethnic church, lots of different experiences there. So if you just ask people in general, do they have a value, or do they place a value on religious practice? Do they place a value on things of a spiritual nature?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they, or neither of those, right? And so it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like both, or one or the other, or neither.
Mm-hmm.
We are seeing a fractioning. So back in kind of the 60s and 70s and 80s, you saw much more consistency in the generation that was kind of the bulk of the church then, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our elders and our maybe Gen Xers are a little more aligned in terms of like, the church is how I grow spiritually. So it's the practice and it's my spiritual beliefs, and that's important to me. As you move into the younger generations, we kind of thought we would see more of this, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
hear that from
Right.
pastors in the church. That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing some of that, but we're also seeing a growing group that says, actually, I value religion more than spirituality, which was a surprise to us. Yeah.
And
So
so
it's
at the
like
time you say
there's,
religion, you mean like the traditions of the church and traditional
yes,
liturgy and liturgical traditions and all that kind of stuff?
yes,
Wow.
yes. So I think what's happening here is, as we've been watching like the emerging Gen Z and the young millennials, right? They live in this digital world. They live in a constantly changing world.
Mm.
And the world is kind of what you make of it, right?
Right.
That's exhausting. They
Right.
would love something that's constant. They would love something that's known, that
It has
has
some
tradition,
absolutes
right?
and traditions.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. So there's a growing group. Now, it's not all of them, but
Right.
there's a growing group of them that's like, I'm really drawn to that. I
Wow.
really value the history and the traditions that come with the practice of religion, not just the spiritual growth. So that's a really interesting shift that I think we're going to see in the future of the church, is a re-engagement in traditions and history, and just really valuing history, maybe more so than in the past.
Which then, for say a denomination as old and as history as the AME Church, allows you
Amen.
to understand that when everybody else is telling you to lean away from tradition, that you can be
Right.
able actually to not let tradition keep you bound, but you
Yeah.
can be able to have a freshness in tradition, and you can value your history, and be able to share it in a way that it brings value. And I would think
Yeah.
that's not just, so say for a Black church or AME church, that's not just kind of just the religious traditions, but also the civil rights traditions.
Yes,
And that
exactly right.
and to be able to connect this kind of struggle, this faith struggle kind of piece that connects our faith experience with our social justice experience, and what that
Yes.
will mean for this generation.
Yeah. I think that's going to be the power zone of the church, honestly, with this next generation, because they want a very integrated life. We're seeing that
Mm-hmm.
with the youngest generation. It's just so many things pulling them in lots of directions. And they're like, look, if I'm going to be committed to a faith, I
Mm-hmm.
want it to mean something in all of my life, right? I want
Right.
all those things to be connected. I want to be able to care about these justice issues, but not have that be disconnected from my church experience. Like,
Right.
this is all one, right?
Right.
And you also said something really important. I think you don't want to toss out tradition just to pursue what's new, but you do need to refresh tradition. It needs
Right.
to be approachable.
Right.
And so churches that can get that balance right, and that can invite young people in to help them shape that, that's going to be a really just a new breath of fresh air in the church. I think it's going to be a really important force going forward.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, I have one other
Yeah.
question right before, and then I want you to just talk a little bit about Barna Access Plus.
Mhm.
But as we're talking about Black churches, we're talking about social justice and those kinds of pieces. So this is a crazy time in the
Mhm.
nation.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that, as we're talking about kind of faith traditions in the church and the Black church, et cetera, and social justice, I think one of the areas, and I'm wondering if you all have done any research on the evangelical church, and
Mm.
especially evangelical church as it's framed within kind of political leanings,
Mhm.
because sometimes we feel so like we're in two different worlds,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
like two totally different worlds then. And when I mean evangelical church, think you know what I mean, like the kind of
Yeah.
politicized evangelical church.
Yeah.
And so I wonder what your research has kind of shown in that way as well, that can kind of help us wrap our head around what's happening with our evangelical brothers and sisters.
Yeah. And thank you for asking that. This is one that's near and dear to my heart. And by the way, you're calling me in Atlanta right now, and we are still waiting on election results. And I'm like, oh Lord, how is this going to go?
Well, and
So,
since you're in Atlanta, I'll tell you this: say hello to my good friend Raphael Warnock, who's running for Senate.
oh man,
He's a good
I'm
brother of
like,
mine.
okay, I wish that we didn't have to do a runoff, but at least he's in the runoff. It's so
That's
good.
right.
Oh, love this man. He is so awesome as a leader. So that's fantastic. Yeah. So, and I'm an exception. I will say, as a white evangelical Christian, I do not fit what we see in our data, right? It is true. The political shift in the church has been really dramatic. And I think there were bits that were already there, but a lot of what we've seen is that when you couple the political angles with the media consumption, then you get this. You get this complete polarization. And so we've literally looked at in the data, like, if you're an evangelical Christian, but you're a Democrat, or if you're an evangelical Christian, but you listen to like CNN and the New York Times, you're going to feel really differently than if you're an evangelical Christian who is a Republican who watches Fox News, right?
Wow.
So there's just like these reinforcing circles.
Right.
So a lot of it is the echo chamber of what people are listening to, and then that shapes how they see issues, right? Because the issues haven't really changed, but what people are doubling down on, what they value, is what has changed. I will say this, that one of the things I think driving some of this is a perception that religious liberty is under attack in the US. And we've seen that in our data. So 16 years ago, the evangelical church broadly was more concerned about a candidate's character than they were about particular issues. And over the last 16 years, that has shifted more and more to doubling down on religious freedoms and on pro-life issues. And so I think what's happening there is a sense of feeling like, oh no, that religious freedom might go away. We have to really protect it. And I think that, of course, in political circles, if someone feeds that narrative, whether it's the media or the political candidates or whatever, people will follow that, right? So we're seeing this fractioning in the church, and it is true. It does feel like you're like in different areas of the church. There is a minority of the evangelical church who's very concerned about social justice issues, but it's more like 20%.
Wow.
You've got more, then you've got more like your 80% who says, no, seriously, I'm all issues driven, and the two issues that matter to me are pro-life and religious liberty, and we're going to do everything to protect those. So I am hopeful and prayerful that the church will continue to learn and grow through this. This has been a hard season personally, in watching the way people have made choices with their faith. The way that we do politics is an expression of what we believe and value. And it's been hard to see that. And it's created some really deep divisions in the church that I think it's going to take a long time to see how those are healed. My one glimmer of optimism is I'm hopeful that it's a catalyst for reform, that the Big C church becomes more united, because there's first going to have to be some repentance over how some of this has gone. And then if we can get through that, then I think there's an opportunity for reform and for refocus. I mean, the church's witness is at stake, right? People outside the church are watching and making a judgment on the church itself.
That's right.
And so I think there's a lot of reckoning that's going to have to happen, whether that's happening this year or if it's happening in 4 years. Lord Jesus, come quickly. We need it.
Soon come, Lord, soon come.
Yes. Yeah. So on that note, we have a study coming out around about the same time. So our Friends in the Black Church study is coming out probably end of February, early March. Early February, we're putting out a study called Beyond Diversity. And we've also spent about 2.5, 3 years studying Christians' beliefs about justice issues, and specifically racial justice, but a number of different social justice issues, and how that's different along denominational lines, or according to what media they're watching, or just what their tradition and upbringing has been and how that
Wow.
shaped their perspective, and then what needs to change, honestly.
So I really think what I believe is extremely valuable is that the work you all are doing, you've been doing it for a while, so you've been already working on this, but God kind of has you ready to be able to release it for such a time as this. And I
Yeah.
just kind of see God's hand in all of that, and all the
Oh,
work you all
yeah.
are doing in this season.
Yeah, it has been an incredible year to be doing these two studies. And in some ways, I'm like, oh, hurry, hurry. Like, we want to get this information out there. But at the same time, I'm thinking, oh, wow, God had us ready to be able to inform the
Hmm.
church so that we're not acting on just our intuition, so that we're informed and we're making wise decisions with data in front of us. And some of the data is really hard.
Right.
We've seen the reaction to racism in this country. We expected people to move forward and to improve in their motivations, and
Hmm.
that's not been the case, and it's been
Wow.
heartbreaking. But we
Wow.
still need to know that. We still
Right.
need to report
Right.
it and
Hmm.
engage appropriately, and a lot of that through prayer.
Right. Right. Well,
Hmm.
that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Now, I want you to talk a little bit about Barna Plus Access, just that
Hmm.
tool and what it is and those kinds of pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is basically a response to some of our loyal followers like yourself who for years bought our reports and said, hey, that's great. What do you have next? How can I get access to more things? So we said, great, let's give people access to more. And at the very least, it's all of the reports that we've published and continue to publish are available in that one place. But we've really stocked it with so much more. We've taken the opportunity to engage digital content, more thoroughly and completely in our work. So it has all of our studies, but then we build on those. We might be doing interviews with people about, well, what does this mean? We've
Hmm.
done the study. What does this mean in this context? Or there might be a course that we do or a little workshop that we do that comes out of a study. Oftentimes we have things called field guides, which is like, take this into your context and follow these steps to try to think through how you're going to respond to this research. So there's videos on there of interviews, there's courses, there's all of our studies. We also take them and we break them down into slides that can be used
Hmm.
in sermons. So
Hmm.
you can literally take the graphics right out of the book and share it with your congregation or your leadership team
Right.
to be able to kind of align around, hey, this is something we're seeing in the church. How are we going to respond? And then there's tools like you mentioned
Hmm.
where you can use these polls that we create to connect with your congregants and get a sense of how they're doing, or if there's a particular topic area you want to check in on them with. You can use these polls to just get the temperature of where everyone is in your church and then use that to make better, more informed decisions.
That's right. And so and I want to make sure that the Fall Conclave knows Barna Access Plus. Many of you all know that I'm running for Director of Church Growth and Development for the AME Church. And I, as a gift to the Potomac District, I want to offer every pastor, every church, a subscription. I've paid for it. I've taken care of it. And so every church in the Potomac District, each church will get one free subscription. All you have to do is text the words grow with Lee to 474747. Look on your screen right now, grow with Lee to 474747. And you can have that on me. Just pray for me as we run for this office, trying to share with the church. I believe that you don't just grow by prayer, but I believe that God also puts gifts in the kingdom to help us to just get tools to be able to be utilized to help churches in seasons like this. And I believe Barna is one of those tools. It's a tool I've been blessed to use, like I said, for decades now. But I believe for a time like this, even during this pandemic, I would just go there, and you all have some of the smartest people I know and friends of mine, some friends and colleagues, but just talking about some of the just greatest topics. And so Grow with Lee, text Grow with Lee to 474747. Get your free subscription on me. AME Church, Potomac District, Fall Conclave. Love you. God bless you. Brooke Hempell, God bless your heart. Uh,
Thank you.
I am so grateful to have had you here. This has been such a rich conversation, and I am so
Yeah,
grateful for you.
thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and I wish all of your church leaders just a great time at the conclave. And thank you so much for engaging with our research.
Thank you.